The phenomenon of experiencing an extended period, such as years, during a very short duration of a salvia divinorum trip, is a fascinating example of how altered states of consciousness can distort time perception. Here's how this might be explained. 1. Altered brain activity. Salvia primarily acts on kappa-opioid receptors, KORs, in the brain, which are involved in modulating perception, emotion, and memory. Activation of these receptors disrupts normal communication patterns in the brain, particularly in regions like the default mode network, DMN, responsible for self-referential thinking and the sense of continuity in time. 2. Time compression and expansion. Under salvia's influence, the brain's typical mechanisms for processing time may collapse or malfunction, leading to compression. You might experience what feels like years compressed into seconds because your brain processes an overwhelming flood of information without anchoring it in real-world time. Expansion. The subjective sense of time can stretch, allowing a 45-second trip to feel like a lifetime because the experience is processed with extraordinary detail and emotional intensity. 3. Hyper-real detail and constructed realities. The human brain is exceptionally skilled at constructing vivid realities in dreams, memories, or imagination. During a salvia trip, this ability is amplified. Hyperreal visions. The brain generates detailed sensory experiences that feel as real as waking life. Narrative construction. To make sense of the experience, your brain might construct a detailed story or life out of fragments of memories, cultural narratives, or subconscious fears/desires. 4. Dissolution of time anchors. In normal consciousness, your sense of time is anchored by external stimuli, a clock or the sun, and internal processes, heartbeat, breathing. Salvia disrupts these anchors, leaving you adrift in a timeless state where events can unfold without the constraints of sequential time. 5. Memory and perception loops. Salvia trips often involve recursive loops or repetitions, where certain experiences are revisited or reinterpreted repeatedly. These loops can feel like entire years or decades lived within the trip, as the same moments are processed over and over. A continuous present, making it seem as if no time exists outside the experience. 6. Emotional amplification. The emotional intensity of salvia trips can make short experiences feel eternal. Profound emotions, joy, fear, love, are experienced with such depth that they seem to span years. A single moment might carry the emotional weight of an entire lifetime, amplifying the sense of extended time. 7. Integration of subconscious content. Your brain might integrate deeply buried subconscious content into the trip, constructing an entire life out of fragments of personal memories, hopes, fears, or traumas, archetypal or cultural symbols. 8. Neurochemical cascade. Salvia triggers a cascade of neurochemical activity that might momentarily heighten perception and processing speed. This could give you the sense of having experienced more in less time, similar to how some people report life reviews during near-death experiences. Example: 8 years in 45 seconds. Imagine living a simulated life in the span of 45 seconds. Your brain might rapidly construct a highly detailed world using memories and imagination. Simulate significant life events, marriage, aging, death, as though they were real. amplify the sensory, emotional, and narrative aspects to make the life feel vivid and authentic. In this state, the boundaries between seconds and years dissolve, leaving you convinced that you lived an entire lifetime. Post-trip reflection. Many users report a time dilation hangover where they struggle to reconcile their real lifetime with the subjective time experienced during the trip. This experience can be profoundly disorienting or enlightening depending on the individual's mindset and setting. In summary, the experience of living years in seconds on a salvia trip is a testament to the brain's capacity for constructing rich, immersive realities and its flexibility in interpreting time.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to It Boggles the Mind. Today's episode is going to be quite interesting. It's going to touch on parallel universes, perhaps, different dimensions, past life experiences, and drug taking, which is not really our thing, but at the same time, it's a very interesting story we have tonight. It's about a gentleman who took salvia and lived 8 years in the space of 45 seconds.
This story is from when he was in a witness protection program in Alaska, having been moved there from Utah, and he decided to stay in Alaska, even though the court case was long gone. He built his own house, he had a wife and kids, and was a Mormon preacher. The story he tells is so incredible and seems so believable. And those two things are very much at odds with each other, because the story he tells is quite literally unbelievable.
It is literally unbelievable, yeah. It's very interesting.
Yet so many parts of it, I just can't see how you could easily make up and live the story he's in. I mean, if you wanted to launch a comedic career as a comedian, if you came up with this story to do it, then by God, you deserve it. Because this is the most incredible thing I think I've ever heard. It's even more unbelievable than, say, Carlos Castaneda or something like that. It's just quite literally mind-boggling. So it's on the right channel. Anyway, so Steve's on a podcast, in this particular podcast, with a couple of Irish guys. And we're just going to play it out. I've actually edited together a couple of videos to sort of make it all flow. And it's about 25 minutes, and we're going to obviously be interrupting it here and there.
Yeah.
Well, let's get back to you. Let's go back to that. Is it salvia?
At the moment where you said that you got this extract from like sage or something?
Salvia, please.
So yeah, so I had bought this stuff called salvia, thinking it was just going to be a mild version of marijuana. Okay. And I'd never in my entire life. Mormons are not allowed to have stimulants or drugs of any kind. They're not allowed to have coffee or even tea. Mormons basically just keep themselves completely, drink water and milk, essentially, is what I grew up my entire life drinking.
Oh, bro, that sucks. Shit.
Yeah.
Were there any loopholes?
No. I had, at this point in my life, I had never been intoxicated in any way, not even having had painkillers. So when I broke my ankle once, and the strongest thing that I had was ibuprofen. So I'd never even felt that feeling before. And my friend, who did not grow up Mormon and who was a hardened Army sergeant, he was fascinated by that, and I was fascinated by the fact that he had used to smoke marijuana when he was a boy before he joined the Army, and he would tell me stories about smoking marijuana, and he would get wistful about those days, and I would, it sounded amazing to me, but I was precluded from being able to do it because of my religion. And at this time, I'm a very serious Mormon. I'm a Mormon preacher. I have a congregation. I have this big, beautiful family. I've been married for 21 years, to a Mormon, my Mormon wife, and that's just the life that I've built my own house in Alaska, where I was sent for this witness protection thing. That trial was long over, but I loved Alaska and I was staying. So that's kind of the intersection in my life that I'm at. I'm 40 years old. and I feel like a virgin of life. I just never done anything.
Yeah.
So I go and get this gear, and it's Christmas Day. Our kids all open their presents. Our wives go into the kitchen to get lunch ready, and he gives me the high sign, and we go down into the basement to where he has this gun room, and that's where I've wrapped up this present for us. And we open the present together. We load the bong with frosty water, and load this huge bowl piece full of this black tar looking salvia stuff that just came in this foil wrapper. And I just, a lot of my friendship with him was just basically proving, I think, to him that I was man enough to be friends with him in some ways, because he was like this army sergeant that had been everywhere and was killing people in the war, and he was this badass, and I was this, Mormon guy. And so in some ways, I think I volunteered to go first because, I didn't want to go small dicks to the salvia party. And so I volunteered to go first. I hit the bowl piece with a micro torch and just took the biggest hit that I could possibly do. I've been watching videos on people taking bong rips, and I just hit a big manly bong rip and held it, and then I felt the floor. And the best way to describe it is I felt like my molecules and the molecules in the floor no longer had anything to do with each other, and I just slid right through the floor of his basement, and there was a short sensation of falling, and then there was a sensation of falling up, and I fell up into a person. I found myself on the deck of this little water skiing boat, coughing up water, and there were a bunch of guys surrounded me on the deck of this water ski boat who were trying to sit me up and pounding my back and saying, "Man, we thought you drowned," but I didn't know any of them. I was suddenly outside. It was warm. It wasn't Christmas anymore, and I was just that's what I thought that's what this salvia trip was. So I was just looking around and amazed at how real everything was. I mean, it was as real as this. It was just the water was wet. I didn't know any of these guys, but they all seemed to know me, and they thought that I'd been water skiing and that I was this different person. And I looked down and I looked slightly different, but it's hard to tell. And I just start laughing. I just start laughing and telling all these guys that none of this is real, and that I'm having a salvia trip, and I'm in witness protection in Alaska, and I'm in my friend's basement, and it's Christmas time, and I'm saying this stuff to these guys, and as I start to tell them this stuff, they get this very worried look on their face, and they're just like, holy shit, and they take the water ski boat back to the dock. They don't even take the time to load it onto the trailer. We just all jump into their pickup truck.
It just sounds so believable to me, because that's exactly what people would do.
Yeah, I mean, so there's some consistencies in reports, because we did a little bit of research before we did the show, and there's consistencies with the effects, the initial effects after taking it. We've read that you feel like you're being either sucked into the ground, and you lose your kind of feeling of position and your physical being, where if you're sat down or if you're laying down, whatever, the chair will envelop you, the floor will envelop you. It's almost like you are gravitationally being sucked back into the earth, isn't it? It's affecting your brain immediately. So that's his initial feeling. Another thing before that, I mean, for someone that's never done drugs before, why would you choose something like that to do? It's not exactly a gateway sort of thing, is it? You don't choose, drinking a drink, Mormon here, you've never taken paracetamol, you've never done anything, coffee, alcohol even. So he's never even felt drunk. What an entry point into some, I couldn't imagine anything worse. If you've never even felt drunk before, why would you go and do something like this?
Well, as you just said,
he
was under the impression it was like a mild form of marijuana.
I don't know who gave him that impression.
Well, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, that point is the thing that's interesting to me is the experience he's in. That he's waking up in the body somebody that has just died.
But what's more interesting is the person that the body he's waking up in, has just had an incident and probably been knocked unconscious. So that's an interesting fact, because it's not like it was some guy walking down the street doing his shopping and then all of a sudden he's in there at Tesco's picking fruit from the vegetable counter. He's actually woken up from a position of being unconscious.
No, they said he was face down in the water for 3 minutes. That means you're dead.
Well, yes, you're not conscious.
Well, your oxygen's been brain has been oxygen starved in that situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is considered dead. But
in other words, if we would just take the sort of, when I died, I saw a light and all this kind of thing. He literally was in the same realm as somebody entering a state of like DMT or that kind of thing.
The near-death experience. Yeah.
He was in that realm, the
Yeah.
right-hand side of the brain,
Yes.
as Jill Botti-Taylor would say. And he came back in a different person, almost like they got muddled up.
He didn't come back in the person that he was going into was in that position. So they had their consciousness had probably left. Who knows what happened to their consciousness of that original person? But that was his entry point. It's almost like if you're waiting to be loaded onto a multiplayer game and you're waiting for a slot, and the next available slot is this guy, and you're just being dropped into that
That's one possibility.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
What about another possibility is that he was in the fifth dimension in a world where something changed 200 years ago. Let's just say 200 years ago. So he had a different name, because when he came to America, his father or grandfather or great-grandfather or whoever was under a different name because they'd had a different job. Because let's just say, I don't know, let's just say that Napoleon won the war against Wellington. And that was the difference. And everything in Europe was different. And so everything that came to America was different. Texas was still Texas, but it was a slightly different Texas. And he was himself. But he had a different surname and he lived in a different place.
Yeah, so you're talking a different dimension.
In other words, it's a bit like sort of like a Mandela effect.
Yeah, multi-dimensional.
Something had changed historically, which brought him to a different place, and he went from one possible outcome of his life,
one possible reality, to another reality where he is still human. But doesn't he not say he looked different?
Well, maybe you would. Maybe your grandmother married someone else. Maybe he was a different. He said he went back to Utah and the town he went to. Yeah,
let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll watch that bit, but let's just talk about the initial bit. He's taken this drug that he's obviously being a Mormon. He's never done anything before, and the effects have just overwhelmed him and sank him to the ground, which is crazy. And then all of a sudden, you become conscious, face down in water.
No. He's not. He's already back on the boat.
Well, you become conscious.
They're bringing him round.
Yeah. Well, that transition has happened after this guy.
He's puking water up, but he comes round.
Yeah.
They've literally.
But he has just had that incident happen, and he's just woken up with people around him that are unfamiliar, with a lifestyle that's unfamiliar. I mean, moving from a lifestyle of being a Mormon with a family to, nearly killing yourself on a jet ski or jet boat or whatever.
But he wasn't there at that point.
No, but I'm just saying. That's what I'm saying. He has just been flung into a reality where he's living a completely different life.
He is waking up, sitting on a boat, puking water out because he's just been revived from what he's been told was a water skiing accident.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It is a completely different lifestyle to what he was used to. It's not like it was something similar. He's waking up in another sofa on the floor. This is completely different. This is completely out there,
It's almost as far away in America as you can get.
Well, exactly.
I mean, apart from being in Miami, you can't really get any further away.
No.
From Alaska.
No.
So, it's kind of interesting to me that it's still America, and that it's still in English.
Yes, and it's in the same time period as well.
Exactly. So to me, the whole idea of it being the fifth dimension, it being the same him, but just an alternate reality,
within the same time period.
That would make that would make sense. Because why didn't he wake up in the 11th century as a monk or something?
Yeah, that lends to the dimensional aspect of it,
but it also does lends to the fact that it's just a completely hallucination.
Of course,
but
I'm trying to be hypothetical here.
The problem is, though, could you really imagine 8 years in 45 seconds?
Well, let's find out. We don't know them.
Well, there's no way we're going to find out.
Let's find out how he did it.
Well, we're going to find out what he experienced, but we're not going to find out how he did it.
No.
But could the brain really work that fast? Could you really have 8 years of experience in 45 seconds if it wasn't real?
Well, if the brain's functionality that records and recognizes the meaning of time and how time is perceived by the individual is scrambled in some way, then how it perceives time could be disrupted. Yes, I could imagine that being a possibility. The drug has that effect, and obviously the effects of the drug will be explained at the end. So,
but he still sees night and day 365 times for 4 years straight.
Well, yes.
So it's not a question of time. It's not a question of changing your experience of time. Those days are going by. It's not like one day seems like 8 years long. These numbers of days are going past.
Yeah, he's living them 24 hours, 7 days, 3
with a clock and a watch and a
telephone he's living a
life.
life.
And a bill.
But yeah.
So it's not, to me, I don't see how that could explain it.
Well, we haven't got to that yet, so let's play it. Let's see, because we need to see how he perceives it and how he lives that, because right now we're at the point where he's awakening, and let's see what he has to say about once he's realised he's in this world.
And they drive me to this urgent care facility where I go in, and they tell the doctor, they're like, hey, our friend was water skiing with us. You know, he fell off his board and was floating face down for a while. By the time we could circle back with the boat and pick him up, he probably had his face underwater for about 3 minutes. And now he doesn't remember any of us. He says that, you know, he lives in Alaska and that he's Mormon and that he's in witness protection and that it's Christmas time. And the doctor's like, well, that's, you know, so they shine lights in my eyes and they have me cross my legs and hit my knee with a rubber hammer, and they test all of my, you know, they test my blood oxygen, and they just do all of the rudimentary things to listen to my lungs. And the doctor said, well, he's fine medically, and true medical amnesia is really rare, almost unheard of. So he'll probably remember everything by morning. So take him home, put him to bed. He hasn't got a concussion, and if it persists, call us tomorrow. So they take me. I'm still freaking. It's been hours now at this point. It's been hours. I can't believe how long this salvia trip is lasting. I'm like wondering what's happening, you know, in Alaska, you know, what my family is saying. Am I missing Christmas dinner? Is my Mormon family freaking out because surely they've discovered now that I've been doing drugs if it's gone on for 5 hours. So my new friends, none of whom I remember, but all of whom claim that they went to school with me my entire life, take me back to this shitty little apartment that I apparently live in and use the keys that were in my jeans to unlock the door, take me into this little apartment where there are my belongings, you know, clothes that fit me, pictures of me, some of them with these guys on the wall, old yearbooks, and they just say, okay, we'll see you tomorrow, try to remember us, ha ha ha, and they leave. And I just sit there on the couch and wait for the salvia trip to end. You know, I'm looking through old yearbooks, looking at pictures of myself, and it's real. Nothing is psychedelic. There are no trippy, you know, there are no tracers. There's no colors. It's just a normal fucking Tuesday.
That's fucking scary.
And I live in Tyler. Tyler, Texas is the name of this town. It's a place it's a real town, but I had never been there before. Yeah. And I just lived in Tyler, Texas. So I drift off to sleep on the couch looking at yearbooks. I wake up to the sound of pounding on the door. And the same friend that dropped me off the night before comes in and says, you didn't come to work. Come on, get dressed. We got to take you to work. He throws some clothes on me, throws me in his pickup truck and takes me to this farm where I work supervising migrant labor. And I just stand there with a clipboard in my hand all day long with a bemused look on my face, just telling everybody who will listen that I'm not real and they're not real and this isn't really happening. And I live in Alaska and I'm Mormon and I'm in witness protection. And so all this crazy shit. And they all just kind of try to laugh it off. But I'm starting to get, worried that it's been a really long time. It's been now 24 hours since I've been in this trip. I'm thinking I must be in the hospital in real life. I must have had some sort of a reaction.
Yeah.
So he takes me home from my day of work and puts me to bed again. And I sit there on top of the bed, just worried, wanting it to be over, like right now, worried that what's going on, worried that I'm in a coma. Did I die? Is this limbo? Because I'm a very religious person at this point still in my life.
And like when you're dreaming, they say like, name a time in a dream ever you've seen your phone. Did you have a phone in this?
Yeah. Everything.
Phone?
I paid a phone. I fucking voted. I paid taxes. I had a fucking cable bill.
Who's the president?
It was Barack Obama at the time, and everything. And I would spend as the days turned into weeks, and I lived every minute of every day in this salvia trip for 8 years. And at this point, I had never heard of salvia. So if I had ever done what you're doing and looked up, there are stories on the internet of people getting stuck as a coat of paint on a barn for 30 years. And they feel every single day of that 30 years being stuck as a coat of paint. So in some ways, I got off easy.
Did you ever think of trying to locate yourself?
Did you ever think of trying to go to Alaska?
Yes. All of those things. I tried all of those things. I tried calling my house. I tried calling my old high school. I tried calling, because my family had been in that little town for generations. So at one point, I actually loaded my ass into an old Pinto and drove the 1,000 miles or so to Smithfield, Utah from Tyler, Texas, and went into this little town fully expecting to see the town that I'd remember for my entire life. A whole hill on the graveyard with Cantwell names on the tombstones, and none of that was accurate.
Right, so that's really, really interesting. So this is back into the multi-dimensional sort of thing, where if he is him in another dimension, i.e. the history in the world that he is now materialized in, something has changed very slightly, whereas America's still America. The presidents and the political parties are all the same, because he said it was still Obama when he was there, so that timeline hasn't changed. But the town that his family grew up in completely changed. It wasn't the same. It was the same town name, but the people that lived within it were different. So something.
Well, he wasn't there. His family weren't there.
His family names weren't on the gravestones.
If he lived in Texas, they wouldn't have been.
No, but he grew up in Utah originally.
No, but
he was born in Utah, wasn't he?
In his new life, it's life he's woken up in. That's not the same life as the life he grew up in Mormon in Utah.
No, but he wanted to see if he existed in that life,
but he couldn't
as another person. But he would never have done. But if he, I think he was trying to confirm to himself that I haven't gone into another person, a different. I've gone into a different person. I haven't gone into me in a different world.
Well, well, hang on a second. What do you mean?
So he hasn't taken the drug and left. What's his name again? Sorry, Steve. Steve hasn't taken the drug, had the effects, and woken up as Steve in another dimension.
Yes, he has.
Well, he might have. That's the confusing thing here. He might be Steve in the other dimension, but Steve in the other dimension's got a different family, had different parents, different history, wasn't born in the same town.
But that's you see, that to me is why there wouldn't be the Cantwell tombstone in Utah. if he'd been born, if he'd gone into someone else's body, then he'd be able to find himself, because he'd still be in the same reality. He's gone into his own body in another reality, and that's why he can't find himself, is because he wasn't born in Utah. He was born in Texas or wherever he was born, and his whole family history is different.
Did he say in his new life he was born in another town, or he was told
he's actually said that.
He hasn't emphasised that. So that's obviously the thing that we obviously need to confirm. But
but if you go to Utah and you didn't exist, I would say that makes it more likely that you're the person you were going to be, the same person. Just something changed in the history of your family, and you wound up in a different place, a different state, a different life.
I think he goes into this, a little bit. He has got different parents and different family. I think later on he does say that the people that know him are different.
I don't think he ever mentions his parents, does he?
Which doesn't lend very well to the story, because you'd want to confirm that. You'd want to confirm that I've got the same mum and dad, and I've got the same brother and sister.
I think you'd be so screwed up.
But not for 8 years. 8 years you'd talk to your parents. You'd try and find your parents, or you'd say, oh, yeah. He got to remember, he has not only just like been parachuted into another human or himself. He has got skills and memories and so forth of this other person. So he has become this other person in the dimension. He's not just dropped. He's got his memories, and he's got the memories of this other person to a certain degree.
He's got that kinesthetic memory. He's
Kinesthetic,
got like muscle, or the Americans call it muscle memory, don't they?
Yeah.
Literally, the sort of the kinesthetic, habitual parts of like playing the ukulele, as he's going to say in a moment, he seems to be able to do, but none of the higher consciousness of this person that he's come into, he has. He has no memory of any of his friends. He has no memory of any of his history.
Right, yeah.
He has no memory of who this person is.
That's his long-term memory. So that part of his consciousness and brain
doesn't. Would you really
doesn't.
want to go and see these parents that you don't know who they are? I don't know if you would.
I don't know, but but back to him not existing in his original place of birth and so forth is interesting.
As far as he's concerned, he's just on a trip. He's completely refuting this whole reality so far.
So far, yes.
So let's see what happens when he gets a little bit further in and he starts to realise this isn't going away.
I went into that town, and it was exactly like going into a town that you'd never been to before. I was just, none of it was the way I remembered it. The high school was named something different. I went into the high school and asked them if if there was any record. My dad had been a school teacher at that school. They had no record of him. So it's just, it was
kind of like you were someone else and your entire family never existed.
Yes. So it was exactly as my new friends in Tyler, my old friends in Tyler were telling me. They said, you had a near drowning incident. You have brain damage, my friend. We have known you your entire life. You've never been Mormon. You know, your family were Methodists, and you were never in witness protection. To our knowledge, you've never been to Alaska. That's just some sort of a fantasy that happened when you were without oxygen. And everybody in this town told me this same story. Everybody at the grocery store would come up to me and say, I know you don't remember us because of your accident, but I was your teacher in second grade, and you were a nice little boy, and my name is Mrs. Eskelson. And, so everybody in this town, to a person, was telling me that they had remembered me for the last 40 years of my life. And faced with that as evidence, and all of the evidence that I could find on the internet, everywhere else, there was no evidence of the Steve Cantwell that was involved in witness protection, and there was no evidence of my family members, So eventually, at about the 4-year mark, I slowly decided that I had imagined my entire family and my entire life, and that I actually had brain damage, and it caused me to forget all of my friends in this town called Tyler that loved me very much and were very patient with my brain damage. But I, rather than just trying to push everybody away because I thought that they were imaginary, at about the halfway mark somewhere, I started to hang out with my friends and to take them up on offers to go camping and to, we would play. We had this little. They would play guitars and stuff like that after work, and we would just sort of jam, and it sort of turned into a band. And when they dropped me off in my apartment in Tyler, there was a ukulele on the couch, and I had not played ukulele before this. But when I picked up the ukulele, I knew how to play the ukulele. My fingers knew the places to go on the strings. I didn't know the names of any of the chords, but my fingers knew where all the chords were, and that was trippy. But I eventually started playing the ukulele with them after work, and we formed a band called Electric Watermelon, and it never turned, nothing ever came of it, but we would play mostly backyard parties. We played a couple of weddings, and we played at the fair and the rodeo one time. So. But it was mostly the camaraderie. It was the fact that I was accepting the fact that I was actually in Tyler, Texas, and that I was not trying to get back to this family that I thought that I had in this marriage of 21 years. I've just accepted the fact that I never got married. I was just hanging out with all of my friends from high school that also never got married. We all worked at this apple orchard together, and that just became my life. And so the last 4 years of my time in Tyler were actually quite nice. I sometimes I would quietly mourn my family. It would always puzzle me. I would sit at night in my house sometimes and watch old movies and television shows that I remembered watching with my family. I had specific memories of these old movies, and it puzzled me that I could remember the plot line for this movie and remember, sitting there next to my daughter during a Disney cartoon, and I could remember listening to her laugh at this movie, but I was trying to wrap my head around the fact that my daughter was imaginary and that my brain was just remembering, Mulan because I'd seen it before my accident. So that kind of shit always fucked with my head a little bit, but eventually I just kind of learned to just accept it as a phenomenon and just kind of shrug my shoulders and I also knew a ridiculous amount of things about Mormonism, which I could not contend with. I knew because all the things that I knew about Mormonism with the secret handshakes and the magic underwear and stuff like that, those are things that Mormons don't really talk about. Every Mormon always wears magic underwear that goes from their knees to their elbows. You wear it 24 hours a day. It's supposed to protect you from bullets, knives, evil spirits, werewolves, anything. And I spent my entire life wearing magic underwear. And I looked that up on the internet when I was in Tyler, and that was exactly accurate. And all that handshake stuff was exactly accurate. And all of the detailed knowledge that I had about the history of the Mormon Church was accurate. And so that was a real fucking head scratcher for me.
I just want to say, for any...
That is a real fucking head scratcher.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting points there. When it was playing, I was just thinking of the program Quantum Leap, and it just reminds me of that, where you're just beamed into this body, except where you haven't got Hal there to remind you exactly what the mission is and what you're there to do. Imagine turning up at your school and it being a different name. Imagine walking through a shop and someone that's known you for 40 years introduces themselves and says, sorry about your accident, but I've known you since you were a little boy. I find it intriguing that he doesn't really mention much about family at all, any element of family, cousins, siblings. I can understand if your parents aren't there, but, uncles, aunts, unless he was adopted, you don't know, but he doesn't mention anything to do with family in this other life, which I find quite suspect. But it's very interesting that he started to look into his religion from his previous life, isn't it?
Well, I think to me that it's the brotherhood he's sort of in, isn't it? It's like he still hangs out with all his unmarried friends from high school. Like, that's his family. That's
it's a very simple life, isn't it?
That's the kind of family he's in. That's a very sort of Texan way of going on. I mean, my oldest friend Alistair lived in Texas for decades when he went to school there and everything, and that's exactly what he said it was like. Like, all the dads would hang out together, even the ones that were married would go and hang out for hours and hours with all their mates that they went to school with, and shine their pickups and drive around in their 5.0s,
shoot the breeze,
exactly,
and just talk,
shoot fish, and all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what he's describing. And okay, and this is quite soon afterwards, because he's not the sort of relaxed, cool-looking Texas comedian guy you see him in later podcasts. You can see he's still in some sort of distress.
He looks a bit rattled still, doesn't he?
Doesn't
yeah.
He doesn't look like a guy who's comfortable with himself. I mean, look at what he's wearing. That's one of the most unsuitable things.
Yeah,
it just looks terrible.
He looks like he's left the Mormon way of life for sure. There's no structure to his life anymore.
He looks like he's
and there wouldn't be, would there? There wouldn't be any structure to
the
it.
House and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And he's sat there by himself smoking pot, uncertain
Beer
what
walls.
to do with himself.
Yeah.
And to me, it just seems
genuinely rattled, isn't it?
Even if it's a hallucination, it's had such a profound effect on him that it is real in those terms. In those terms, it's real.
But he said he was one of the lucky ones. I mean, like he mentioned in the video, I mean, some people that have smoked it, they report being just like a slab of paint on the wall watching the world go by, and
for 30 years.
For 30 years. I mean, yeah, you definitely got away with it lightly if you had another life and you weren't just some inornate piece of paint on the wall.
How much you'd learn about your own perception and your own... Because you'd have no body. You'd have no... that you wouldn't be able to live or die. I mean, just imagine how mind-expanding that would be. It would be, to be non-biological. Inorganic.
Inanimate object that,
with
perception.
And the question is, if a barn wall doesn't have perception, how could you get into it? Do you know what I mean? Does that mean that there's more to animism than...
That means the chair you could be sitting on right now could be someone consciously having to put up with your fucking ass for the last 10 years. Yeah, it could be that crazy. It could be.
Well, I mean, it's only crazy from our perspective, isn't it? But I mean, the simple truth is, if you could live that 30 years, and that's 30... So that's 30 times 365 24-hour days. And you don't have any arms or legs or sex organs or mouth or nose.
But you have a consciousness and you have eyes because you're seeing.
You don't eat.
Yeah, but you have eyes. You have something, a visual. You have a visual interface you have a visual interface with this perception, which is very interesting.
But maybe it's not. Maybe it's not just. I mean, we'll have to look at that one because presumably it's smell, taste, touch, and everything else too. I mean, would you just spend 30 years hoping someone doesn't show up with a fire axe? I mean,
or take a piss on your leg.
What do you do? I mean, the whole thing is, but of course, I don't know how much truth there is in that one anyway.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, we can't speak from experience because I've never done it, so I wouldn't know what that feels like. But at the same time, it's very hard to grasp those stories, being an inanimate object and living like that for years. But this story from Steve is something we can relate to more because we can, live a life and have friendships and so forth.
But also, it just kind of fits in with what a lot of people say about ayahuasca, DMT, and all these kind. It just seems to have it. It sort of rings true from what a lot of things I've read about various other experiences. But I think most importantly of all, Steve believes it happened. I don't doubt that.
Yeah, it's very true. He believes it happened, and that's what means that, that's what matters. But going back to what you just said on the people that have these different experiences on ayahuasca and DMT and those sort of things, it just goes to show that the interface we have with the reality around us is not as real as we perceive it to be. You are sitting here with your hand on a piece of wood or desk, and that feels like a solid object to you, but it's only an electrical signal that's going to your brain telling you it's a solid object.
If it's even electrical.
And it just shows to you that
our state of mind is the most important thing.
Yeah, it's not what you perceive. Things aren't what you perceive. They are programmed.
If I took Brian Cox and gave him some of this when he didn't realise what was happening, he would not be Brian Cox the next day. He would be a different human being. Even if he went lay down on the floor for 45 seconds and had what appeared to be an epileptic fit, he would have had let's just say he lived 12 years as a milkman in Binfield. I mean, you just don't know what.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes you wonder, what form of reality are we in? We interface with each other as we're sat here next to each other having a chat. We are two consciousnesses conversing and exchanging information. But beyond that, we have ears, we're hearing what we're saying, we're getting emotions from what we say and what we're seeing, and we're interfacing with different things. But is it real?
But is that fundamentally real? Could we be, if we sat down together and did the same salvia thing, could we literally wind up stuck in the same wall of the same barn with no body for 30 years? And when we came back, who the hell else would we have to talk to about it? I mean, we'd be locked together in an experience that no one else would ever even believe.
Yeah, but the fact that you could record 30 years of being a wall and remember it all as you come back into the perceived reality that you're meant to originate from, and have that memory still downloaded in you, and believe it as well, is another fascinating perspective, isn't it?
4 years in, it took him 4 years to break his old life, even though he was homesick for all the way through.
Yes.
He would watch the videos, miss his daughter and everything. Then he still enjoyed that 4 years, even though he had those occasional off days. He enjoyed those 4 years with his friends in Texas. Well, let's face it, it's a pretty great place to live. He literally lived 10% of anyone's adult life, well, more than 10%, more like 15% of most people's adult lives. He got that for the price of a bag of salvia. Now this has completely changed this guy's life. He's now a comedian in Texas. So to me, to go to Texas and to feel so at home there means he must have been in Texas, and yet he'd never been to Texas.
It's very interesting, the fact that I think it has really great applications, this drug. I mean, imagine if you were on your deathbed and you only had a day or two to live. You'd want to take a bit of salvia and have this experience, wouldn't you? You'd want to at least extend your life by 8 years, make new friends.
Why would you wait until you're on your deathbed? Because every day you don't do it, you're missing 8 years, right?
Yeah, it depends on what your morals are in regards to drugs and that sort of thing. I'm talking about the applications. You can medicate people like this, or you could even use that as a capital punishment. What you could do is give it to prisoners who have like 10 years, and every day feed them some salvia, and they live another 8 years on each day, living in a life of purgatory.
Maybe. What would happen if they woke up as the president of the United States?
Well, that's not that far from reality, actually.
And then just decided to take revenge on humanity in general and start a nuclear war. I don't know if it would be. The problem would be is that if it turned out to be a reality. Because let's face it, I don't think there's any situation you could ever. It's one of the great mysteries to me about medication and doctors. How you could be allowed to force someone to take medication that changes their reality just because you're a doctor. I mean, so, how you could give someone electric shock therapy. I mean, if you were allowed to get somebody to do salvia, just imagine that. So you could make them live 30 years as the wall of a barn.
Yeah, but at the beginning of medicine, people used to be lobotomized, and the person that invented or discovered lobotomy got a Nobel Peace Prize, a Nobel Prize for Science, didn't he? And what they didn't realize when people were lobotomized, yes, it stopped the erratic behavior, but it also had side effects of stopping other sort of human thoughts and human interaction. It was seen as a means to an end, but the side effects of it were so grave that it completely destroyed people's minds and memory.
Well, of course, that's what it is.
So what we perceive to be something that could be useful and helpful to cure whatever illness could have side effects, obviously at the opposite end, that could be detrimental.
But lobotomy is damaging the brain.
Yeah, you
This
literally.
is using a completely natural.
No,
power.
but I'm talking about the idea. Yeah, I'm talking about the idea of applying something to alter someone's mind, thinking that it will do good, and it could do the complete opposite.
Yeah, for sure. But let's just say that somebody did salvia every morning at 9 o'clock in the morning every day of their lives and spent 8 years as a different person every morning. If that person started doing that at 20, so every day you're living 8 years. So in 365 days, you're living about that's what 24,000. It's about 30,000 years every year. So I mean,
I think it's safe to say schizophrenia will be on the menu for that one. After you will come out so confused of the reality that you are in.
Bear in mind that's only going to take 45 seconds of your day.
So 45 seconds of the reality that everyone else is in, but the reality you and your mind are in are a completely different thing. Your perception is going to be completely scrambled. You're going to be schizophrenic.
The first time you do it, you spend 8 years as a scuba diving instructor in Australia, and then the next day
you're a wall.
You spend 8 days as a bit of 2x4 in a building in Surrey, and then the next day
a shopping trolley.
You're a woman in a nunnery in Sicily, and then the next day you're
a tortoise,
an astronaut, and then the next day you're. I haven't heard anyone that becomes an animal yet.
No, you're right. Actually, it's true. They become inanimate objects or another human being.
Yes.
They are themselves in a world that they don't recognise.
Yes.
They are themselves, but they are in hell, or they are somewhere that's completely unrecognisable.
They're in a world that's made of marbles, or it's
in
made
hell.
of
They're literally
oysters,
in hell.
or it's made of chickens.
Yeah,
something like that. So by the time you'd been at that for a week, you would have 56 years of experience. That you would be so far removed. You would have lived nearly an entire life. I mean, by the time you were a fortnight in, you would have lived longer than most people, almost anyone's ever lived in 14 completely different lives in 2 weeks, which was actually 112 years.
And that could be a great thing or a completely terrible thing to happen to you. But at the same time, it does lend to the notion that your mindset before you go into these realms has to be in a certain place for you to have a certain type of experience.
Once you started to acclimatise to a huge change, just imagine the wisdom you would have coming back to this world. Just imagine let's just say that back in the old days, warlocks and witches did this stuff all the time.
But they did. They burnt sage all the time, and they did it in wigwams. They did it all the time.
They would have been so wise. They would have known about worlds that we can't even begin to imagine and lived there for decades. And they would have done it daily, weekly. You could go and ask those people about anything.
Yeah.
And they could give you an answer of so much profundity, so much intelligence. It would have made the church look ridiculous. And I think that's a huge reason they went on that witch hunting thing throughout all of the... They had to get rid of people who were demonstrably more useful than any of their deities or the people they were preaching about. These people,
they weren't indoctrinated into
the people
the
who
system.
wrote the Bible sound like imbeciles.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm not going to go into the Bible and religion because obviously it's something written by a man to control other men is not something that I lend to. I see what you're saying. The esoteric side of the esoteric element of human history has been erased because we've lost that history of enlightenment from these substances that were used on a regular basis to enlighten the elders.
Salvia is our equivalent of ayahuasca that the Brazilians use.
Yes, and it was used by medicine doctors, by medicine men and the Druids. Yeah, all that sort of thing.
Paladins, all these people, they were enlightened in a different... they talk about the age of enlightenment. I think it's exactly the opposite. They were enlightened before these ideas, these compressive ideas of science, which collapse your whole mind into a single state of mind. If you've only ever been in a single state of mind, your outlook is incredibly bleak and simple and mindless.
It's tunnel vision. It's blinkered and controlled, and it's like a railway to one destination.
What would happen if we gave George W. Bush a salvia trip?
Well, from the look at some of his paintings, I think he has been on one. But okay, well, let's see where this goes.
Anyone who's scratching their head right now, just think about putting yourself in that situation. You're off with the lads. You got a little doob of some sort, and one massive pull, and suddenly you wake up. You have these people pulling you out of the water, and they're super concerned. You sound like you're a crazy person to them, and then the whole process of going to the doctor, living a life, years. As you said, that just sounds crazy. 8 years.
How did you wake up? How did that happen?
Well, I think we'll get to that.
Yeah. So so while I'm looking up the Mormon Church and wondering at how I have all this knowledge about the Mormon Church, I look a little bit further, and I look into because most of the people that are talking about the secret handshakes and the magic underwear are people that have left the Mormon Church, and so they've got all this realistic but negative shit to say about it. And so for the first time in my life, I don't know anybody around me that's Mormon, so I have the courage, I think, to really look at some of those viewpoints for the first time, knowing that no one's going to look over my shoulder. If my logic is, if I really am Mormon and I'm looking where God has told me not to look on the internet, I'm not really doing it because I'm imagining this. And if I'm not imagining this, then I'm not really Mormon. So with that logic scale, it just allowed me to read everything about the Mormon Church, and I convinced myself that if I ever had been involved with the Mormon Church, that it was probably a mistake. And I convinced myself that it was a cult. And so, I go on living my life in Tyler, Texas, playing an electric watermelon, hanging out with my friends, do a better job at my job. My boss gives me a raise because, he thinks that I've pushed beyond my brain damage, and I'm able to be more helpful around the farm. And so I just lived this very normal life for the last 4 years. And my last day in Tyler, I'm actually walking across the park with a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken under my arm. I can see my friends in the distance hanging around this picnic table talking, and I'm walking towards them. And for no reason, just I get that same feeling where my feet don't have the molecules in my body, don't have anything to do with the molecules on the ground. And I just find myself falling through the grass.
I want to interrupt that for a second. I just want to go back. Let me see if I can find the right place.
I convinced myself that it was, my logic is, if I really am Mormon and I'm looking where God has told me not to look on the internet, I'm not really doing it because I'm imagining this. And if I'm not imagining this, then I'm not really Mormon. So
now that, to me, I find absolutely fascinating, because he is doing something he never would have done as himself. And he's sourcing information he never would have seen as himself. And yet he's finding out this information which convinces him that Mormonism is a cult. So either he did this in his real life before he did the salvia trip and he's repressed it out of guilt or something like that, or that's pretty far-fetched.
That's pretty unlikely, yeah.
Or he's really in another dimension in Tyler, reading about Mormonism on a real internet where these people. I mean, he doesn't
And
say
becoming disillusioned with Steve's life.
does he hook up with the people he sees when he comes back? Does he hook up with those people he saw online?
Yeah, I don't think that happens.
But well, there's a few other interviews by him that we're going to have to get into at some point.
To do another part. We'll have to do.
We're going to have to do a part 2 to this, because to me, I can't see how he could watch videos that would make him persuade him that Mormonism was a cult, which are definitely out there, in his own imagination as a hallucination. I can't see how that's possible, because how could your mind generate information you'd never even considered looking at? I just don't understand how that's possible.
I think what would have been the driving force in those actions is that he realised that he'd come from this previous life where it was such an important part of his life that something in him probably wanted to look into it and go and taste the forbidden fruits, let's say.
How could it be there in his hallucination?
Because he's in the hallucination, but he's still Steve. He's still a Mormon preacher. And if you haven't been in that realm or in that world for 4 years, the mind will wonder, what's it like to do this or what's it like to do that? Because you weren't in that world. You weren't allowed to look on the internet.
But
you weren't allowed to go.
That's what I'm asking you, is how could he source that information in a fantasy?
It's an interesting question. I can't really answer it, because who knows what the driver was for that move.
But I'm not talking about what the driver was. I'm talking about what he discovered. He went online in this other reality and found people describing the Mormon religion as a cult.
Yes.
Which you can do today.
Yes.
But how did he do that in a fantasy? If it was a fantasy? How could he have found that information?
Because the world he was in had the internet and it had Mormonism. It was still a cult then, but he didn't. The world he came from, which he didn't know any better, it was his religion. The world he went into,
So
it was still a religion in the world he went into, but there he was allowed to interface with the internet, research it, and come to the realization without feeling guilt, because he knew he was someone else.
That. But what I'm saying is, if it was a fantasy, how could he have found that information when he had no knowledge of it? How could he have created that information in his own mind?
If it was a fantasy, how you're saying? If it was a fantasy, how could he think that he was a Mormon preacher, and he's researching Mormon life? I don't understand.
About Texas. Obviously, the Mormon preacher thing's not a fantasy, because that's where he
That's
woke
what
up.
That's what you're losing me there. You're losing me, because what he is doing is he's researching the Mormon religion in this reality that he's now found himself in.
Right, so we are saying that it's a real reality.
For him, it is.
No, not just for him, because there's people putting stuff on YouTube in that reality that he's reading about Mormonism that he could not possibly have known about. He couldn't have manufactured those ideas because he had no knowledge of them.
No, but if this reality is what it is, and those people that he's interacting with and the world he's interacting with is real, he has a job, it's real, he's picking apples which are real, he has friends which are real, he's in a band which is real to him. Everything around it, the peripheral of it, the interactions that he's having with whatever he's doing, is real in that world.
Yeah, but what
The
I'm
people's
saying-
opinion on the internet are real because those are real people in that world, in that dimension, with an opinion about Mormonism, which says it's a cult. And he is interfacing with that world.
So you're saying it is a real world?
It could be.
Okay, but that's what I'm asking you.
Yeah, it could be. It could be a real world.
But how could he have synthesized the ideas about Mormonism that turned out to be real when he woke up again? How could he have synthesized that if it was just a trip?
Okay, so yes. Yes, now I see where you're leading to. Okay, fine. So
He had to
he
have
was
gone somewhere.
influenced. He was influenced in this world by the opinions of people within that world that his religion was a cult. Now we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves because obviously we haven't gone to the part where he wakes up again. But he's just about to wake up.
Yes, we have because we've come back again. We went back.
Okay, we went back again, but we haven't got to that part where he's walking up with a KFC bucket and he's going back into his well. That's where we've left off.
Yes.
But we're kind of pre-shadowing that and saying that now he comes back into this world with this information that he's learnt from the world he's come from.
Exactly.
And
So
it has
that's why-
changed his perception of his religion to the point where he gives it up.
But that information is the same information he would have found in this world.
Yes.
But he never looked it up in this world.
Yes. Correct.
So how could he have synthesized it? That world had to be real in
True,
some way.
but we're listening to him recount it. So if it wasn't real, if what he's saying is made up, he could easily put that into the storyline. So, assuming it is real, let's just assume it's real. Then it's very difficult to understand how that could have happened. Yes, I understand.
Okay, but also the fact that he went back to Texas and felt at home enough there to start standing up and being a comedian
It influenced him
lends
that
more
much.
credence to this to me.
Okay, that's
So,
fair
I mean,
enough.
he
I mean,
divorced his wife because she wasn't down with him smoking pot
smoking
and all the
sage.
rest of it. She wasn't down with him leaving the Mormon church.
Well, we're assuming that. We don't know that. She left him for some reason. I don't know. I don't know what the facts are there. I can't just assume.
But I mean, he has freed himself of this sort of Mormon cult being. He's rejected that faith.
Yeah, he's released himself from the shackles of Mormon life.
And his life has massively changed because of it. That doesn't sound like something he made up.
No. But yeah, well, let's see where it goes.
What I'm trying to establish here is that this, to me, is a bigger deal than just somebody making up a story. That's my opinion.
That's a fair enough opinion, but yeah, I mean, it lends to the fact that there are ways to, if you were to traverse into another reality or dimension, that the influences that dimension could have some profound effects on you that you take back with you to your own reality.
Absolutely, but you've got to bear in mind that this isn't like, spending 3 hours running through a hall full of zombies because you're on an acid trip. This is 8 years of what he accepted as a real life.
But it is also, it could have been 8 years as a wall, as a barn door. You got to remember that this reality has stemmed from something deep in his psyche. If it is something that the drug has, it's purely something that's manifested from the drug and not a actual alternate reality. Let's just say hypothetically that this world that he has landed himself into is a complete fictional world that is made from his experiences.
That's exactly what I started out talking about. Is that he found information in that world he couldn't have known, and he brought it back to this world.
Yes.
So how could it have been a fantasy?
Because he could be fantasizing about reading the internet and finding out his religion's a fucking cult.
But how could he know? How could he know that? How could he access that information if he was never privy to it? This guy's a preacher.
Yeah.
He's never been anywhere near that kind of material.
Yeah, I can't say that. It's his experience. It's difficult to, because we'd have to live that experience yourself to understand how much that religion means to you, and how earth-shattering it would be to see opinions of it be explained like that, and for it to be so profound that it changes your reality would be, it's very difficult to put your finger on.
I'm talking about something very, very, very separate. He accessed material online in this world that he had no prior knowledge of before he took this drug.
Yeah, I know.
So how did he find that information?
Because in that world, he would have known, in his world, he knows what the internet is. He's just not allowed to access it. So it's not like he's done something he's forbidden from doing in his reality, his normal reality, and he's doing it in this reality. And when he's doing it in this reality, he's discovering things about himself and his religion that he could never possibly have understood in his own reality. And he's now brought that back. And that has changed his perception.
I still don't think you're understanding what I'm asking.
No, I don't think you understand what you're talking about.
I've asked it so many times. I've asked you about 8 times in a row now.
I don't understand. 8 times in a row, you don't make any sense. You're not making any sense because I'm answering you.
You haven't even got near the point. But there's not.
All right, let's just move on.
With that logic scale, it just allowed me to read everything about the Mormon Church, and I convinced myself that, if I ever had been involved with the Mormon Church, that it was probably a mistake, and I convinced myself that it was a cult, and so I go on living my life in Tyler, Texas, playing an electric watermelon, hanging out with my friends, do a better job at my job. My boss gives me a raise because, he thinks that I've pushed beyond my brain damage, and I'm able to be more helpful around the farm. And so I just lived this very normal life for the last 4 years. And my last day in Tyler, I'm actually walking across the park with a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken under my arm. I can see my friends in the distance hanging around this picnic table talking, and I'm walking towards them. And for no reason, just I get that same feeling where my feet don't have the molecules in my body, don't have anything to do with the molecules on the ground. And I just find myself falling through the grass in this park. And there's the same short sensation of falling, and then that sensation of falling up. And I find myself on the floor in my friend's gun room, and I am having a full seizure. I'm just like, and my wife is behind me, holding onto my head and my arm, and the room is spinning around me, and then I feel it spin and then slow down, and then everything just sort of locks into place molecularly is the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the seizure stops. My friend, who has got a scared look on his face, is dialing the phone at this moment, dialing 911 for an ambulance to come. And my wife says, "Hang up. I think he's coming out of it." And I came out of it, and I just exploded crying. I just could not believe the fact that I was back. I was actually in Alaska, and my wife, who I thought I had imagined, was there holding me, and I could hear my kids outside in the hallway saying, "What's wrong with Daddy?" But they sounded very real. And I had pissed myself all over the floor, but I just started blabbering to both of them and telling them this story of the last 8 years of my life. And, oh my God, I thought I imagined you. And I'm just talking a million miles an hour. And she's like, "Shut up, you're ruining Christmas. I can't believe you were down here doing drugs." And so my friend lends me a pair of sweatpants and lets me go into the guest bathroom and wash the piss off of me so that I can come up and eat Christmas dinner with the family.
I doubt you were very hungry.
I felt like I hadn't eaten in 8 years. But so I just told her. I told her this whole story while I was showering the piss off of myself. so, and then she gets me under control, gets me dressed into some borrowed clothes. I go upstairs, and it's like a Christmas carol. It's Christmas. My children, who I haven't seen in 8 years, are gathered like angels all around the dinner table, and I just start to cry as soon as I come in the room. And I'm walking around and petting their hair. And I'm not telling them the story at this point, but I'm like kissing them and making a fucking ass of myself. And
You were still a little high at this point, were you?
I don't think that I was high. I think I was just, because it felt like I was within a few minutes that I was back with it, had all my faculties, but I was still just shocked by the fact that I was back and that all of this was real. And I guess I really do live in Alaska, and I guess I really am Mormon, and that threw me. The last thing I expected that I was going to be Mormon. When we left there, I told my wife, I said, hey, one of the things I figured out on this trip is that I don't want to be Mormon anymore. I want us to get out of the Mormon church. I don't want the kids to grow up Mormon. So I walked into that gun room, a Mormon preacher, and by the way, total elapsed time, they said that I was having this trip. My friend and my ex-wife, their best estimate, 45 seconds. 45 seconds of having a seizure on the floor equated 8 years, every minute of 8 years, in an imaginary version of Tyler, Texas.
Now, he describes it as an imaginary version. But I have a really hard time understanding how you could find information you'd never seen before that would change the course of your life in an imaginary version of Tyler, Texas, and it's a real place that he'd never been before. I mean, how did he know it existed? What, he saw it on a map?
It's wild. It's a wild story. I mean, in conclusion, this drug is quite dangerous. I would suggest no one ever do it. It sounds terrifying to me. I'm in no rush to ever try that. Maybe on my deathbed I might try that. Just last hurrah. Hopefully I won't end up as a hospital bed or someone's special underwear or something like that.
One thing I can promise you is you won't be able to get salvia in a hospital.
No, of course. But yeah, if it was near the end, maybe I'd try it. But other than that, this is such an intriguing story. It's so interesting. It does lend to that, to what the ancients used to do, and smoking sage and taking DMT and ayahuasca and those sort of things. And now you could see why these things were so influential in those cultures, and why the wise people were so wise, because they could have lived thousands of different lives.
Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah, they could have lived forever, couldn't they?
These people literally would have been... I mean, whatever you want to say about spending... Let's just say these people really did spend 10 years as a wall, or 10 years as a... reincarnated as a dog, or 10 years as a milkman in Botswana, or whatever. Once you've done it like 20 times... you wouldn't have to worry about not coming back, because you'd know you were coming back. So you could live that life almost like an experiment.
Like a visitor.
Like a visitor. And it would be much less damaging once you had that understanding. And the wisdom and understanding of other cultures and other people. You would be so colossally wise if you'd lived 100,000 years. If you've done this stuff twice a day, every day for 3 years, I mean, that's 700 different lives.
You'd be very well travelled, wouldn't you?
10 years ago or whatever, 8 years ago, that's 56,000 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of experience doesn't come... you would be able to help people with anything. You'd have lived lives without arms, without legs, paralysed. You'd have lived every kind of... after 700 goes, you've lived minority lives. You've lived the lives of the wealthy. You've lived the lives of the poor. Probably more often the poor, obviously.
Yeah.
But you'd also have lived lives of refugees. You'd have lived lives of, people who were abused, people who were tortured. You would have so
warriors,
much...
victims, murderers, the murdered.
Well, that's an interesting question. What would happen if you were killed while you were in it? Is an interesting question.
Yeah, it is.
We don't really know what happened. I mean, let's just assume for 1 second it was a real reality. What happened to the person who was holding that Kentucky Fried Chicken? Did they return to being him? Or did they die?
Did that reality just envelop itself and become nothing? Or did the original inhabitant of that vessel return?
In which case they lost 8 years of their life.
They were probably living the Mormon life on the carpet.
Well, you say that.
Dribbling.
They've been away 8 years in their own life. Whereas he was only gone 45 seconds in his.
Or was he coexisting with them? And they were dormant. Just watching him live their life for them.
Well, I've never heard anyone report that.
Well, yeah, of course no, but it's interesting that what happens to the original occupant of that.
What if he lived another life every 45 seconds for that whole 8 years? And when he came back, he was just like, fellas, I got so many stories I don't know where to start.
I'm not water skiing again.
Exactly. You know.
I don't know. I hate KFC.
Exactly. Oh God! I tell you, I've just lived 600,000 different lives, and I tell you what, I was once stuck as this bastard in frickin' Utah. It was horrible.
I was dribbling and I pissed my pants.
Yeah. But no, of course, he kills the one person he couldn't have been because it was only way 45 seconds. But it's a story of, you know, when you look at stuff like the witch trials and all that kind of thing, it makes you realise that to enforce something like Christianity and, you know, literacy across the world, if people really had ongoing access to herbs of that kind of power, they had to be destroyed. Because
the wisdom you can garner from that is
also just that stuff like
immense.
paying taxes. Who's going to pay taxes when they've just lived 4,000 years since last week?
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
and all they need is a bit of fire and a bush.
And a bush that they wrap up and prepare in a certain way and dry it
and smoke it, and that's it.
And then, you know, it's just you cannot rule people with that kind of power.
No,
because
you cannot allow them to have that level of knowledge of life experience and hope to control them in any way, because they would know so much more than you would.
And also, of course, they
knowledge
would be
is power.
under other types of control. You know, they'd have experienced barons, they'd have experienced like legions of centurions or whatever, they'd have experienced emperors, they'd have experienced queens. They would just know how everything works.
But it's not just how, exactly, not only how the human experience was, but how a tree would live, or how a mountain would exist.
Exactly. Just imagine if you spend a life as
nature, not just the hierarchy of human society. You're talking about every element of Earth.
8 years as a fisherman, you know, you'd know everything. You'd be able to go anywhere and survive anything. Because your experience is completely real and you would feel so familiar. I mean, one question he never answers is whether he can still play the ukulele.
That's interesting, yeah. I think we need to make this a multi-parter, but we're going to leave you now with a little montage we created, which actually gives you the perspective of, well, we got it from ChatGPT, but we asked ChatGPT to give us a description of sage and its effects on the brain and so forth.
Yes. Yeah,
and that we'll play that for you shortly after this. But I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll possibly try and make this another two-parter and see if there's a follow-up to this experience. Thank you.